All right. Hello, everybody out there. I'm Thomas Hall, Executive Director of Clean Start, and you're here for another Clean Start perspective. First, I want to recognize who supports us. That is SMUD, Chico Start, Fresno State, the Wet Center down there. That's Water Te Energy Technology Center, Witten Law, Moss Adams, and River City Bank. All of these groups work together to make projects happen and accelerate clean tech and sustainable technologies in the Central Valley. So if you're looking for support, make sure that you reach out to these people. Next, I would like to welcome Laura Ramos, Director of Research and Education at Fresno State. I first met Laura Ramos when your work at the Wet Center. And if you are interested in irrigation and the future of, I guess, water in California, especially around ag, which uses 80 to 90% of our water, I highly suggest you go check out the work that they're doing in Fresno State and rewatch this recording after it's done because there's going to be a lot of good information shared. And with that, I would like to welcome Laura Ramos to take over and start presenting.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me today. Let's share my screen. This morning, thank you, Tom. My name is Laura Ramos from the California Water Institute, specifically the Research and Education Division of the Institute at Fresno State. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about navigating California's water regulations. And I say a little bit because water regulations in California, I could speak for days. Like you could get a degree in this, and that there's so much. So we're going to go just touch a little bit in high level just to get your toes in understanding some of this stuff and some of the agencies that regulate all of the water in California. But before I go into that, let me tell you a little bit about the California Water Institute. Our goal is to be the bridge between California water issues and facing all of the different areas, urban, industry, the different sides of the environmental, small communities, water contamination, water quality, water quantity, and the Fresno State faculty, staff, and students that do some of the research to identify sustainable solutions in a very interdisciplinary way. And we at Fresno State have our farm that is 1,000 acre farm that is a working farm. And so a lot of the practices we're able to learn them and understand them and implement them on campus to then educate those in the community. But also we work a lot with the farmers and the communities outside to do some of that. So it's a bridge between both. We bring solutions and research from Fresno State into the community, and then we bring in some of the challenges that the community is facing into Fresno State. So it is a bridge that goes both ways. This morning, I'm going to cover a few items. So first, I'm going to touch on some of the key regulations shaping California's water use and mostly the difference between surface water and groundwater. To some of us, it's all water, but it's regulated very differently. We're going to talk about some of the funding opportunities. Then we're going to talk about some of the incentives and the reasons why we do groundwater management. And then lastly, some of the resources that are available to all of you. So let me go ahead and get started with just the regulatory landscape, which, like I said earlier, it's pretty big, but I'll start with surface water rights. And so surface water rights has several different aspects, but there are three of the main ones are riparian, appropriative rights, and then public trust doctrine. And how California started with its water rights, it brought from England some of the regulations that they had. And so the basis was if you are near a waterway or a river and that passes by your land, you have the right to use that water in without affecting others in that also have water to that access or rights to that water. And then during the gold rush era, the appropriative rights began because a lot of the miners needed some of that water for for their practices, but they were not near a waterway. And so then they started diverting some of that water and the appropriative rights began. But also there's a public trust doctrine just saying that water for California should be thought as for the general public and what's the benefit to everybody. And so there's usually some issues or strong conversations that come between what is the best for our communities, what's the best for Californians, and the rights that certain landowners have, or water rights are a property right, and so how do you give up your right for the general public? And so there's a lot of concerns about that. And in order to facilitate all of those water rights, then there's a lot of different regulatory bodies and they regulate different things. And so first we have the State Water Resources Control Board, who focuses on the water quality. We want to make sure that Californians are drinking good quality water, setting the standards and implementing those standards. But then they also do some of the regulations for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and they are the main ones that have all of the water rights documents and issue additional or deny additional requests for water rights. We then have the Department of Water Resources, who manages most of the surface water. It owns some of the dams and canals, and so they help move the water along California. And then we have local regional water quality control boards that focus specifically on the quality of water and implementing new regulations to make sure that our water is not contaminated. And then we have brand new groundwater sustainability agencies that make sure that we, in the Central Valley, in specific areas that focus or have an emphasis on groundwater for their water needs, is sustainable for the long haul. And so we'll talk a little bit more of that on that shortly. And then we have key mandates. We have mandates that come from all of them that work specifically to supply, to quality, that nitrates, salts, and different things that affect all of those items. And then mandates like the Groundwater Sustainability Act that mandates that we become sustainable with our groundwater. And so it is important to understand that all of those layers are, even though they're different layers and they're different parts of it, it is all one landscape, and they all kind of work together most of the time. At times they contradict each other, but for the most part they try to work within one another. So a little bit more of the groundwater management. So for many years, California was one of the only states that did not regulate groundwater. If you own the land, you own the water underneath that land. And as long as you had the money to put in a well as deep as you needed, you can pump as much water as you needed. And we in California tend to think of our groundwater as like our savings account for water. And so we try to use surface water like our checkings account that, it sometimes, some years can vary, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, and we use that water when it's available, and then when we don't, we go to our savings account and then we extract it from there to meet the needs. The problem had been that we were using our savings account a lot more than what we were putting in. And so traditionally water naturally percolated into the ground, and we added water in different ways to that savings account. But that has changed because we changed our practices, we changed how we were doing things, and so it's much water wasn't percolating into the ground. And so in comes the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and it does not prohibit a landowner from extracting water, but it says like you have to maintain a certain balance in order to be sustainable and in order to prevent some of the damages that have occurred because of overpumping of groundwater. And so with that, there are some groundwater sustainability plans that each one of these areas had to create. And those plans are very localized to say, what sustainability means to your area is up to you. Just tell us if it's reasonable, we will approve it, and tell us how you're going to get there. And then there's some incentives to being compliant. There's a lot of technical assistance. There's grant priorities if you are within one of those areas and you are making sure that you're following the rules, that your GSA is incentivizing those farmers, those landowners in their area to make sure that they remain compliant. And if you're not compliant, if DWR doesn't feel that you have done enough to be sustainable, then there's consequences for not having for not doing action or enough action. And so then that is when the state will come in and tell you what sustainability means. So the best way for an area is to be localized, to say this is what sustainability is to us, instead of allowing the state to come in and saying this is what it is to them. And so why should somebody remain compliant with some of these regulations? So, there's escalating pressures there. Like I said earlier, we traditionally the Mother Nature, it rained and water percolated into the ground. We irrigated our fields by flooding, and then any excess water that the crop didn't need, it went into the ground. And so we were doing things that, we were filling up our groundwater, but that is no longer changing. We've become a lot more efficient with our water. And so we provide only what the plant needs. And so now there's not that items that are going in. And then just our climate is changing. We are getting the same amount of precipitation, but it's coming more in the form of rain than in the form of snow. But all of our infrastructure and how California was ready, it was for us to get more snow instead of water. And so there's all these pressures that are coming with, damage that excess pumping has caused, and then just not being able to meet those changes. And then there's litigation that is happening that is causing some stricter regulations. There's also funding that is available to those that are in compliant. And so if you're not compliant, then might not have access to some of those funds that become available if you are. Some of those examples are water meters. There are a lot of areas in the Central Valley that do not use water meters. And so sometimes that's hard to understand, because how do you measure or manage what you can't measure or what you don't measure? And so a lot of these landowners have managed a lot of their water just because of experience, because they know about how much water they need. They've done it for so many years that they could probably tell you the numbers pretty close to a water meter. But a water meter is just more accurate. You have data that is available quickly, but also then you're able to share that data. And so some of the groundwater sustainability agencies are providing some funding for some of those equipment. But if you don't have those equipment, then you might not get funding, access to additional fundings that would be available if you're meeting those mandates, such as putting water meters in some of your practices. And then just building trust with your GSA, with the agencies, and saying, okay, this is what the funding opportunities are, this is what you're mandated to do, and say, they're not here to stop farming, to stop anything. They're here to help. And so it's going to them and saying, what are some of my options? What are some of the things that I can do to continue farming but still meet the compliances? And what are some of the resources that are available to me as a landowner? So that gets us into, how do you engage with the regulatory process? Is, join some of the governance, participate in the GSA boards and the advisory committees. All of these have meetings that are open to the public that you can attend and provide feedback. There are also at times when there's public comment periods where the GSAs or any changes or any new regulations are made available to everybody, and you can submit public comment. So it's making sure that you're aware of when it's the comment period and that you make your voice heard when all of these regulations are being made. And then that we also share innovation. We want to create public pilot programs, pilot research, have data help better manage practices, but we need to be able to show that some of those new technologies are working and how we are using them best. And so at times it's not always financially feasible to do pilot programs. So for that, there's some funding that could be available. A few of the funding that I'm going to talk a little bit about today are the Infrastructure Investment Act and then the Inflation Reduction Act, which are both federal. And just due to some of the changes, I won't go into much on those just because it's constantly changing. And what I tell you today might not be accurate tomorrow. But there also is the California Prop 4 that recently passed. And so what that one is $10 billion of investment in climate resilience. And so is funding for drought, flood, and water supply technology. There is some funding in there for land conservation, habitat restoration, and then there is also funding for farms and agriculture. There are additional items that this bond covers, but just for my purposes and for working in water, these are some of the ones that are specific to some of the things that we are tracking and that we're working on. And it is the different technologies that go into making these things happen. And at times, private companies might not be able to apply for this funding, but it is important that that you partner with others that are available or are able to apply for this funding and partner with them to do some pilot studies and to showcase that the technology does what it needs to do. And so again, just going right into it, some of the strategies for thriving in this new water economy is, build your knowledge, build the knowledge of, who's the State Water Board, what's the difference between a GSP and a GSA, build your knowledge of new technologies, of new innovations, or just needs in this space. Collaborate with others, universities, other organizations. There are a lot of things that were traditionally just environmentally related or just ag related that are no longer the case anymore. We are using some farming practices and ag practices to work on improving some of or restoring some of the habitat and floodplains that were once used for farming, but those practices are being used to restore that to what they once were. A lot of the groundwater sustainability agencies and their plans are, adaptive. It's adaptive management. What did you learn last month? And what did you learn last year? How can you adapt and manage differently? And then you do it all over again. Every year, every 5 years, you're learning from what you did. And so what they're doing one year might be completely different than in 10 years because of what they've learned throughout the process and revising it. Partner with academic resources, utilize, us at Fresno State. We do have, like I said, we have a working farm, but we also have a 6-acre plot of research at the Center for Irrigation Technology that are specific to research versus the farm is made to be a working farm. And so that leads me right into what are some of the resources available to you. So the California Water Institute, we offer a lot of workshops. We do a lot of connecting and partnerships. We do a lot of student-led data collection and support with compliance efforts, and we try to bring the challenges from the community members and try to identify solutions. And we want to make sure that our students get firsthand practice or knowledge of some of the challenges that are happening so that they can build solutions as they go into the workforce. And so to help with some of the education of the general public, we are having a water boot camp on May 2nd, 9, 16 in English, and then May 30th in Spanish. And in those workshops, we're going to teach you about, a little bit more about water rights, surface water distribution, how to California is incredible at moving water all over the state. And so how do we do that and how does that happen and who does that? Also, like I mentioned, the Center for Irrigation Technology is our sister partner at the university, and they have a 6-acre research plot, but also they have a testing facility to test different equipment. And then we have the Water Energy and Technology Center on campus who focuses on entrepreneurs and helping them navigate the creating of a business process. So that is what I had in terms of presentation. So I will pass it back over to Tom. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that. So you talked about some of the, I guess, incentives for upgrading or updating people's water infrastructure. Could you expand on where those sources are and how much there is?
So it varies and then it's all over the place. That's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but some of the local groundwater sustainability agencies have some funding available. Sometimes they're the ones that apply for the funding from the state or the federal government to help improve whether it's the canals that deliver water to you, to build groundwater system, uh, recharge basins, or even the meters and the technologies that's going to collect information. So it can come from local, from the irrigation districts, groundwater sustainability agencies. The counties have some funds. The state has some funds, but I think that the best place for now would be to focus on the sustainability agencies and how they're distributing some of those funds.
So you also mentioned that for the groundwater sustainability agencies, that individual communities get to pick what sustainability means to them, which I think, having heard some stories from yourself and Dr. Hilliard at the Center for Irrigation Technologies, seems like an important step to get them to buy into it. Because I mean, if you've ever driven down 5 or anywhere, you'll see, the farmers' opinions on big signs along the road. Um, but what has sustainability looked like to these communities when they've been able to choose? Has there any that have come up with it yet?
I heard a farmer once tell me because we were asking because sustainability, just that word is used so much and everybody uses it different. And I asked a farmer like what sustainability meant to him. And he said that my children get to farm the farm that I am currently farming. And so to some people it means, being able to do what you're doing for years to come. For some of the cities, sustainability means being able to provide water to their constituents when there's a drought. And so for every person is going to be different, but the Groundwater Sustainability Act that said, you must be sustainable within your area. And so for the most part, that means that there is enough water in our groundwater, which is like our savings account, making sure that you have enough savings for the future.
Okay, so groundwater, and you also mentioned that we're having the same amount of precipitation, but it's not in snow. Um, what about, storage of water in the state? I didn't really hear anything on incentives or anything around that. I know we have this great kind of system of dams and levees and everywhere through the state controlling a lot of our water. Um, but a lot of our storage was in snow. And the groundwater was another storage that, we're trying to be responsible with. But as far as the future of water storage in the state, um, are we going to potentially see more dams or more storage built, or is this going to be, an efficiency solution mostly?
So I don't anticipate seeing, many dams being built in the near future, or even starting or even talking about. I mean, a dam would take you years to get built, a lot of environmental concerns, a lot of permitting. And like you said, we were meant for snow. Our snowpack was one of our storage reservoirs for many years, but it's not being used that way. But we can actually store in the ground 4 times or maybe more than what we can store currently above ground because we've extracted so much water that there's space down in the aquifers to to store some of that water. And it is quicker, it is less regulations, but it also means taking land out of production. So there's pros and cons to do that. In 2023, there was a lot of water that could have been stored, but we didn't have enough recharge basins in the Central Valley to put all that water in. And even if we did, all of the canals were completely full, so we couldn't have moved additional water to those areas. And so it is identifying additional recharge areas, additional technologies, because I mentioned earlier that, most of the time you have to take land out of production to do groundwater recharge, but there's newer technology that is coming along that is subsurface recharge. And so you don't have to take land out of production and you can still recharge that has still the benefit and additional benefit. So it's learning new ways of putting water into the ground that is quicker than what Mother Nature can do and just more of it. And then maybe doing some dams, but a combination of both. We just need to store a lot more water because of the rain than we have in the past.
Now, one of the things I guess energy markets have an ability to do pretty well is, trade energy and store it in different places. And you mentioned like when we had plenty of water, we also have, um the water systems that move it were full. Um, so about 20 years ago, a lot of people talked about, hey, you're gonna make water tradable. That we're going to be able to create these markets and we'll have a market solution for it. And I've heard about market solutions working in some areas around the world, but what's currently kind of holding back those sort of market solutions in California? Is it regulations or is it something that's, physically really hard to do?
It's a little bit of both. Um, and at times there are some regulations with the molecule of water. There are some water that is only supposed to be where it began and used in that area. So if it began in the same watershed, it can be used in that watershed, but not taken out of that watershed. Some of the water has regulations where it's for that irrigation district, so it can be traded within the irrigation district, but not outside of that irrigation district. But there is some water, Californians are creative when it comes to their water. There is some water that doesn't have those restrictions, and we're able to move that water from Northern California, Shasta Dam, Oroville, and all those areas, all the way down to the LA area. And we're able to move it when we need to, but we're really good at moving a large amount of waters to large areas, but not to the smaller areas. So at times they might be able to get it close to where the water is needed, but not exactly to where it's needed. And most of our water flows or our canals flow one way, east to west or north to south, but sometimes we need the opposite way. So we do need some additional infrastructure to be able to move some of that water, and then some changes in our regulations. There has been some water trading going on in some of the local irrigation districts because they're able to use that water in that same area. And
If
so it's
only
a little
there,
bit of both.
I'm gonna say if only there was AC and DC for water or water equivalents so that you could make a grid on it. Uh, some analogies only go, so far. One thing that you kind of mentioned before, and actually I was at Climate Week and I went to a water discussion, which had some very knowledgeable people, but they didn't like to talk about ag because when I brought it up, they're like, because ag is really, really hard compared to industrial water usage. But one of them mentioned that Israel is another country that is very good at managing its water. And one of the issues that it has is they've gotten so efficient that it actually causes problems. And you mentioned that farms have gotten so efficient that when they used to recharge the groundwater inadvertently, they're not anymore. Um, so, and you also talked about like having big basins for recharge. And personally, I remember years ago being told groundwater recharge is a fantasy and doesn't work. But after our last discussions, I've learned that that is not true. So, what are the new kind of technologies coming with recharge that you hope to see that, and are they being deployed now, or is it something that's coming in the near future?
So the one I mentioned earlier was a subsurface irrigation or the subsurface recharge. And so what that is, I don't know that I can get a picture quickly to show you, but it is a technology that goes underneath the root zone of a crop. And what some of the benefits for those are that you're able to treat the water or have better quality of water that is going underneath. And so when you put water in a recharge basin, you lose some of it to evaporation, and then you have some contamination that is happening just from it being out in the open space. And if you have the subsurface one, then you're able to treat it first and then put it in and not take any land out of production and then push the water down. We actually have a pilot test here at the university where we put it underneath the almond orchards, and we put sensors all around it to see does it go down, does it go up. Now, mind you, it depends on the soil, and there's several reasons that can happen, and so that's one of the newer-ish technologies that is coming along to be able to help with not losing land. But one of the things, you mentioned that farmers are hard, or they don't always implement new technology. And I think part of it is, that they're family farms. Yes, there are some big industrial farming, but for the most part, you're a small person or a small family farm, and to completely change out the technology that is being used in the farm might be too big of an undertaking, or they're just worried, or sometimes they're just so used to farming the way that they've had for so many years. They're like, what can you really teach me? And a lot of them really did embrace drip irrigation and micro irrigation. And they were like, oh, efficiency, using less water. And so when you are pumping groundwater, you do want to be efficient, because you don't want to pump that water to then recharge it again. But when you're using surface water, you do want to do that. And so when a lot of the farmers switched out their systems to, instead of flooding, to doing drip or micro, they took out their flooding equipment, and now we're saying no, 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 like leave it in there. So be efficient when you're using groundwater, flood when there is surface water, because then you're keeping the benefit of both. So we're learning still, even though we've been farming for many, many years, we're still learning along the way that, we need a little bit of both.
Yeah. I'm going to call on the audience here. And I want to note, I did notice that Peter Mackin's hand went up the second that I talked about AC and DC current. And that's either because he loves working on the grid, or he's also a heavy metal fan. So we'll figure out what it is. Peter, what's your question?
Actually, it's not really well, it's sort of a question, but it actually has nothing to do with electricity, other than to say I raised my hand when you were talking about markets and water. And so I'm just, well, okay, so I guess the only way that you could really get markets to work is you'd have to change regulations in a way that, instead of basically putting a tag on every molecule of water and saying, okay, this is my water molecule, you just say, okay, all the water is, I guess, public benefit, and everyone has a right to a certain amount, or so if you have water rights, you have a right to a certain amount of water, but it doesn't necessarily have to come from the water that's under your property or the water that's flowing in the surface, stream or river that runs through your property. Is you just get a certain amount of water, and where it comes from doesn't matter. So that way, if someone needed, and Thomas was talking about, making the water kind of flow backwards, you really don't have to make the water flow backwards. You just don't send it to the south, say, and somebody else sends it to the south, and then the water that was supposed to go to the south is then used in the north because somebody bought it to use in the north. So in some cases you might have a problem with actual flow, but in a lot of cases it's just because somebody says, this is my water and I'm not sending it anywhere, right? So anyway, so that's just kind of my thought. It's more of a comment than anything else.
And one thing maybe this I might you might be able to add on to this, Laura, is one thing that markets really need to work is a price on water. Is there? I mean, I see lots of social media saying, water is a human right, and that's not what we're getting into. Um, but is there really a price on water where someone can go and like if I want to buy a carbon credit, I know where I can buy a carbon credit. And if I want to buy electricity, I can go look at the market price on electricity. Is there kind of an understood source for like the price of water?
Yes, and so every single the price varies depending on where it is that it's at. And then it's not really that the price of the actual water is what varies, but it's the price of delivering the water to that area and whether it's treated water or untreated water. And so the best place to start is your local irrigation district to see if they can help you get access to some of that water. And now when water markets started popping up and having more conversations about that, and some of the local irrigation districts did like an eBay for water, but for their specific district, because that, as Peter said, that we have regulations on who owns that water, what you can do with it, even though it should be that, those that need water have access to it. And so the local irrigation district did something like that. And the biggest concern was if you're doing I will pay more, then it's the disadvantaged communities that can't afford that water that need it the most that are not the ones that are the highest bidder. And so now you run into problems where, the environment needs water, and so environment activists are going to purchase some water, but they're not the ones with the deep pockets or the disadvantaged communities. And so there's still a lot of things that need to be worked out for markets to really work. At the moment, where they're working well is local irrigation districts where one farmer is saying, I'm going to follow my land. I'm in the same irrigation district as my neighbor, so I'm going to sell them my right to that water. And so it's still very localized. It's still, in the works. I think we have a lot to learn about markets still in the water space, including, can we move it there? And as Peter said, but at the moment it's getting there. It's still going to take us some time.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's probably a really good point because um while the water as a human right is a completely different discussion, people do need water to survive. Um and it's not just for our food, it's also for us. So a water shortage can result in serious impacts. So on, I guess, on the kind of new technology side, what about, I know desal is something that, it's a technology we've had for a while. It does take a lot of energy, but it could have a lot of applications. Is there anyone working on, potentially using desalinization to reclaim water and utilize it?
Yes, so the traditional desal that are the big treatment plants that are near the ocean are the ones that have traditionally been worked on that do take up a lot of energy. There's a lot of environmental concerns with the brine and what do you do with the salt? We only need so much table salt in the world, and you can't really put it back into the ocean because now you're causing other concerns into the ocean. But there are some newer technologies that I've heard of that are like pods that are out on the ocean, bringing in that water, treating it out there that don't land, that are more efficient, that are bringing the water in. But also, a lot of the places that we need desal that we don't really think about it is inland. There are a lot of areas in the San Joaquin Valley where the water that is coming out of the ground has a lot of salt. Traditionally we were under the ocean. We had a lot of salt. We also import a lot of salt because we import a lot of water that comes with salt. And so now we're putting a lot of salt on our soils and our grounds. And so all of that is going into the groundwater. And so we need to use desal to be able to use that water. Some crops are able to take that salt, some are not. And so getting more creative with and also more ideas on what do we do with the salt that is left over after that it gets used. Finding a way to use that product and get creative is the idea that we need to develop more.
Create a market for it. So, let's say I have a farm and it's an older farm, I want to keep it in my family. Um, and I want to get, I want to have a sustainable farm because like you said, they want their sustainability is having their family keep it. Um, where would you point me to get resources to help me have a sustainable farm within the California's regulation? Where would you say, hey, make sure that you look at this, make sure you go engage with these people? Where would you point me?
Probably the closest and best one would be your farm bureau, your local irrigation district, and your local groundwater sustainability agency, because all three of them are focused on helping the area be sustainable, but they also want flourishing farmlands. Now, I could point you to the state, to the Department of Water Resources, but the best place to start would be your local contacts, and then they could point you to other contacts or other ideas, but usually they're the ones bringing that information locally from the other areas. So instead of needing a lobbyist or an advocate or, all of those, your best place would be your local farm bureaus, irrigation districts, and groundwater sustainability agencies.
And they might have funding for helping me upgrade my farm or take actions that are sustainable.
Yes, they want to make sure that they don't want farms to go out of production, but they know that there needs to be less water that's being used. And so they have some funding for meters for you to be able to manage the water that you're using better, to upgrade into more efficient technology. And there are some funding that's becoming available, or incentives to create recharge basins on your farm. And so they would be the ones that and at times they're the ones applying for the funding, because one of the things is farmers are great at farming. They're not great grant writers, they're not great grant reporters, or, you know, everything that comes with getting a grant. And we don't need them to become experts in all of that, because we need them to continue being experts at farming. And so the agency or the county would be the ones applying for the funding and helping them with that process, so that they don't have to do as much of it.
That reminds me of one of the biggest farmers that I knew when I worked in Chico. Um, Someone asked him how he was so successful at farming and growing his farms, and his answer was buy low, sell high. And it's like, okay. But let's like so water basins, they don't follow geographic or political geographic boundaries on it. And so let's kind of look kind of at some of the big picture, I guess, impacting California, which is, Las Vegas or the Colorado River. Uh there, I mean, I'm trying to formulate like how do we have a discussion about, the Colorado River, making sure that we're not using all of it, but that we're getting enough for the communities that are around it? And what kind of role does California play in it?
So that's actually a great question, because a lot of Californians do not realize that we get a lot of our water from the Colorado River, and we're one of the primary ones that have water rights to the Colorado River. And so the major rivers in California that provide all of the surface water are the Sacramento River, the San Joaquin River, and the Colorado River. And so what ends up happening is, at times we think, oh, there's a lot of rain over here. So in 2023, we saw flooding. We are like, oh, there's a lot of water. Let's store it. We're out of a drought. But the Colorado River was in a drought. And so we weren't getting as much water that we normally would get from the Colorado River, which provides a lot of the water to Southern California, Imperial Valley, and all of them have a lot of the water rights to that water. So if they're not getting their water from the Colorado River because it's in a drought, they're getting the water from Northern California. And so, being in the drought, one of the things that we talk about is very regional. We can't just say California is in a drought or not in a drought, because it's maybe it's Southern California, maybe it's Northern California that's in a drought, but we need to think of it as in a holistic way, because if the Colorado River isn't healthy, then California's water isn't healthy. And so we need to make sure that we're balancing between the two, and our neighboring states, that also there are 6 states that get water from the Colorado River. We have the primary rights to it, but it's still something that we have to share with everybody. And the farmers and people, one of the things that I hear is, well, we don't have enough water, let's not farm. And I'm like, well, population is growing. how do we feed more people with less crops? And so you have to balance the two.
Yeah, it's not just being a good neighbor to our states, it's being a good neighbor to Mexico as well, which is definitely feeling the pain of when we take water out of the
Water.
Colorado. And uh where the the salad or fruit basket or whatever of the world here in California. And I struggle to think that the thing we need to have less of is the fruits and vegetables. So,
Yes.
so um
Or nuts.
or nuts, yeah. So how do you say it? Almonds or almonds?
I say almonds.
And she
Potato,
goes,
potato,
their almonds till they fall off the tree because when they fall off the tree, they get the L knocked out of them. Was it the other way around?
The L knocked out. Oh my gosh.
I had not heard
Almonds,
that.
almonds, yeah. Um, all right. So kind of like as we wrap it up, do you have any final comments on what people about the importance and what people should do to take action?
Yes, I think just educating yourself about water. I think there's a lot of what we call bumper sticker ideas or a lot of phrases that we hear like, oh, that small fish and we're wasting water out to the ocean. And some of these things are not always accurate. And so it's educating yourself about like the importance of the delta, the need for some of that water to go out into the ocean for to prevent saltwater intrusion. And so I think there's a lot of miscommunication and a lot of bumper sticker ideas or comments that are going around. And I think just educating yourself and as we develop new technologies, knowing which ones are going to fit, how can we be more sustainable? And technology is what's probably going to get us there. Farmers are using the same amount of water that they did in the 70s, but are producing a lot more crops that they did then with the same amount of water because they've gotten so efficient and it's technology that it's gotten us there. So I think new technologies is what's going to get us out of a lot of these things.
Yeah, and you can see those new technologies at the Wet Center, at the Center for Irrigation Technologies, and the Center for Water Innovation, or CWI,
California Water Institute.
California Water Institute, which Laura Ramos is now the Director of Research and Education there. So with that, we're going to wrap things up. I want to thank Laura Ramos for joining us today, for Fresno State for letting her come and talk with us. You can see an edited version of this on YouTube later. Additionally, we had a discussion with Dr. Charles Hillier of the Center for Irrigation Technologies, and we have an upcoming one with Eric Hayden of the Wet Center. Make sure that you attend those and check out our sponsors. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and thank you for attending and goodbye. Appreciate it all.
Thank
Bye.
you for having me, Tom.
All right. Bye.